More of the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey, getting ready for the big 4th of July weekend. 5:33 is the time here in the Princeton Orthopedic Associates studios. Last night, Mets get the big win over the Cubbies. Yankees get the win during the day. Gregorius tied the game. Then they had the walk-off pass ball. The Phillies were off. But now joining us on the hotline is Jon Heyman, who is a MLB Network insider and does a tremendous job with them. Jon, Zach Gelb here. Thanks for a few minutes, and how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing great, and I appreciate you giving us a few minutes today. So I'm a Mets fan, and I'll tell you, I didn't expect last night to happen, especially after what happened in the nation's capital going up against the Cubbies. That was some win for the Mets last night, Jon.
Yeah, you know what? I ran into Sandy Alderson at Starbucks this morning, and he said it's good to win some games when you don't deserve it, and maybe this will get him started. So you know what? That was a nice big win. It's always good to beat the Cubs, who are the best team in the National League at this moment, along with the Giants. And, obviously Matt's toughed it out. I give him credit for that. And if he can keep going, that'll be a big plus for them as well.
If you were a Mets fan, how nervous would you be when you hear about all this bone spur talk with both Syndergaard and Matz?
Yeah, I'd be a little nervous on Matz. He's been pitching with pain. He had a cortisone shot. Syndergaard he was throwing 101 in his last outing. Not that that's everything, but he says it's nothing. They say it's very small in his case. With Matz, it seems to be affecting his slider. He hasn't been as good as he usually is. So I'm a little concerned about Matz. He obviously will need the surgery at some point. Could be sooner rather than later, though.
And last night you have the moonshot by Yoenis Cespedes, 441 feet. And then you also had Nimmo have some clutch heroics for the Mets as well. What's been your impression so far of Nimmo in left field?
Well, it's early, certainly. I'm impressed that anybody from Wyoming has made it. I think he's the 15th or 16th player from Wyoming to make it. And I loved how enthusiastic he was yesterday with a big smile, with a clutch single, and then making that nice tour around the bases. So it was certainly a great moment for him. I think he's going to be a major leaguer. I don't know whether he's going to be a star. I think people question how much power he has. For a left fielder, you'd like to see a little more power in left field probably. But I certainly liked his attitude, his enthusiasm, and had a nice hit last night.
And the player that he replaced was Michael Conforto. And you take a look at Conforto last year, Game 4 of the World Series, had not one but two solo shots. And this happens all the time when you have a young player having some struggles. They send him down, and they try to get him to figure out what is going wrong with his swing. How long do you anticipate Conforto to be in the minors, Jon?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to be a long, long time. I do think he's going to be a star. He's got a great swing. He certainly has impressed Keith Hernandez, and Keith Hernandez knows something about swings. First-round draft choice. I think Conforto is going to be a star. Whether he's up in 2 weeks, a month, I couldn't tell you for sure, but he will be a star at some point, and he will be back up this year.
You take a look at the Mets, they're in desperate need of a big-time bat. The starting rotation is good. We know that. Even though they haven't been at their best this year, if the season was to end today, they'd be in the wild card playing game going up against the Dodgers. Jose Reyes, they hope to get something out of him, should be up next week. Are you okay with the Mets bringing back Jose Reyes, especially with everything that happened with the domestic abuse situation?
Yeah, well, obviously he did something terrible. There's no question about that. And he is now going to counseling and doing what he can to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. Certainly a public relations negative, and he's got to stick with his counseling, no question. But I think everybody deserves a second chance. I'm not shocked now that I see that the Mets were the ones that signed him. It seemed originally that they weren't going to, but I think that it's works better for a team that he'd been on, a team that knows him. The fans love him. He started out 1-17 in the one for 17 in the minors, so he's going to have to get going a bit. But it's probably worth the low risk in terms of the dollars. So we'll see him at third base initially, and then depending on what else they do, he may move around a bit. Certainly an adjustment. He's had not been a third baseman. He's basically played all of his games at shortstop except for that one stint at second early on. So I think it's a low risk, probably worth doing, might not be the last thing that they do. If we recall last year, they got Kelly Johnson, they got Uribe, then they got a big one in Cespedes, and that worked out unbelievably well. After they had looked at Gomez and looked at Upton, it looked like Cespedes was their third or fourth choice, but sometimes the third or fourth choice is better than your first two or three choices.
Yeah, to me, Reyes is kind of like that Band-Aid kind of player, help the immediate need that they have right now, and he's not going to steal 60 stolen bases like what he was once in his youth, and there's going to be an adjustment period, so we'll see what he could bring to the team, but I agree, it's a low-risk, high-reward move. You also take a look at the names of an Escobar, a Valencia, a Frazier. Do you expect the Mets, and they're in a tough financial situation from now until the trade deadline, which is a month away, to maybe go out there and get an Escobar, a Valencia, or even a Frazier? Who do you think that best suits the Mets right now when you take a look at some of the guys on the market?
Yeah, right now I just don't see the White Sox becoming a seller. I think they're pretty intent on trying to stay in it, at least to get a wild card. Cleveland's been pretty tough at this point, but half a season to go, and they're pretty heavily invested with all the moves they made, including Shields. I know other teams are looking at them as maybe they will sell, and if they do, Frazier would certainly be at the top of the list for teams to be interested, along with ex-Yankee closer David Robertson. That'd be another guy that other teams would look at. Mets obviously great with a closer with Familia, but so I think Frazier is a very, very big long shot. I guess if Reyes doesn't work out, they can look at Escobar, Valencia, Jed Lowry, David Freese. There's a whole coterie of guys that they could consider. I'm not sure any of them are world beaters. I do like Valencia, the best of the group. I haven't heard his name around the Mets much, but he's shown significant power not only this year but last year as well, and he could be somebody who could help him. Lowry has got a high batting average and some versatility, good for a team, so it's possible that's somebody that they could look at. Jed Lowry, I'm speaking of. But, we'll see. Reyes is going to give it a shot. They're going to give it a shot with him, and maybe he'll surprise us.
Valencia only making $3.1 million. To me, that just makes so much sense for the Mets as we're talking to Jon Heyman, MLB Network insider. John, let's get to the Phillies. I've been impressed with the Phillies the last two series. You have that San Francisco series. You have Johnny Cueto throwing at Franco, and then the Phillies were able to go into Arizona and get the sweep. That situation really got the bats going out in Arizona after the whole incident with Maikel Franco in the San Francisco series. But the big news with the Phillies is Aaron Nola has not looked good in his last four starts, keeps on having those quick starts. What's going on with Nola right now?
Yeah, it's sometimes an adjustment for pitchers as well as hitters. He was very good last year. He's right now struggling mightily. I think they do see him as one of their starters going forward, in fact, even in the top three in a rotation potentially. So I think he'll straighten himself out. He's a very good young pitcher in my estimation. And I think that they'll be pleased with him in the long run. I'm impressed with McCannon, really. I think he's done a very good job with them. Got off to a very surprising and solid start. They had a really rough week or two, and then they bounced back and played much better lately. Again, I thought they were dead in the water. I think he's really done a great job in terms of motivation and the rest, and I think that when they get better, and they do have prospects now, they've flipped it over pretty good between the Amaro trades and the trades that have been made. I think their prospect stash is pretty decent right now. It's probably went from the bottom third up to the top third, so they're going to turn it around, and I think McCannon has shown that he should be at least a strong candidate to stay when they get good. He's obviously been very good in this transition period, and I am impressed with him. In terms of the team, Herrera looks like a really good player in center, but they're just not a team that's going to compete, and so I give them credit for doing their best and for McCannon getting the best out of them to this point.
And really with McCannon, he's holding these younger guys accountable, and they're not just going to promote guys just because they have a need. They want guys that are going to come up here, be hard workers, and also play the game the right way. And Nick Williams had that whole situation 2 times this year where he got pulled and benched, and then it happened again because he didn't run out coming out of the box down to first base. That's a guy that really is costing himself a chance on a big league roster. and a Nick Williams, John, just because he's not running out of ball hard, where if you take a look at it, his numbers in AAA suggest that a call-up should be coming soon, but McCannon won't call him up because he's not trying as hard as he should be.
Right. Well, I think they're doing the right thing. I mean, the Phillies are not a contender. They need to set a tone for how they want things done. They did the same with Herrera when he didn't run one out, and I think he learned his lesson. And I mean, you've got to establish the ground rules and stick to them. You can't have favoritism, and if somebody happens twice to, that's certainly a concern. And I give the Phillies credit for doing the right thing. You don't want to reward someone who is not doing the right thing on the field.
Wrapping up with Jon Heyman, who joins us right now. Let's get to the Yanks before we let you run. Didi had the big walk-off home run in the comeback 2 nights ago, and last day, actually, as it was a day game for the Yankees, he was able to go on out there and tie up the game with the solo shot. What's the biggest difference with this game from last year to this year, John?
With his game, I think just maturity. I think when he got over, he was feeling the pressure to try to replace Derek Jeter, and it really isn't possible to fill Derek Jeter's shoes, and I think that probably was his problem for the first 6 weeks. He was pretty good after that, maybe not quite as good as he's been this year, but I think he just had a really terrible start. There was a lot of pressure on him, as there would be anybody replacing a legend, and I think he's just being himself now. He's a terrific defender, got great range. I think Stick Michael was correct about him. A very, very good defensive player, and the high batting average now is a bonus. So that's really one of the pleasant surprises, if you want to call it that, for the Yankees so far.
Now, before we let you run, I anticipate the Yankees to be active at the deadline, even though they're only 3 games back of that second wild card spot. I would expect Beltran to be moved, but you take a look at the 3 arms, I would have to imagine one of those arms ends up in Chicago, and maybe Kyle Schwarber ends up with the Yankees, John. How about that?
Well, I think the Cubs are saying, and of course it's early now, so teams sometimes soften their stances later, but I think the Cubs are saying for now they're not trading Schwarber and they're not trading Baez, they're not trading any of their top young players, and I think they probably will stick to that because really what do the Cubs need? They need a relief pitcher, right? So it's probably unlikely to give up a potential star for a reliever. So I just don't think that Theo will do that. We will see, of course. I do think if the Yankees fall, they will be sellers. At this point, from what I'm gathering, it sounds like there's a little bit of a split in the organization. Steinbrenner and Levine do not want to sell. I think Cashman's a little more amenable to it, perhaps. That's what we're hearing around the league. But, if you ask him, he says he's just doing his job, going out there and seeing what's out there. But if the Yankees are still 3 out, despite being on 500 and not looking great, I just don't see them as a seller. That's not their MO. That's not in their DNA. They haven't sold anything significant since Ricky Henderson in 1989 in season. So I'm going to be surprised. Maybe I'm the only one who will be surprised if they make trades at 500 or thereabouts. But it's possible. Teams have done it, but the White Sox are recalled for their white flag trade in '97, selling pieces 2.5 out. So the Yankees not a big seller. If they're 3 out, they're not doing. Now, of course, if they slip and they're 7 or 8 out, all bets are off. And I think at that point, I think Chapman is likely to go and Beltran is likely to go. Miller, I think they want to hold on to him. So not too likely that we'll trade Miller.
John, always appreciate you giving us a few minutes. Enjoy the 4th of July weekend. Thanks so much.
All right, good talking to you.